is not just a communication tool, as we all know. Behind the language, we have history, we have culture, we have identity, and we have pride.
Cultural Relations Organization, we believe that language sustains cultural diversity, connects people, connects cultures, it aids understanding, and it builds long-term trust.
Can make use of this outcome of this conference to build up a better future for the whole world. Thank you so much.
Is very useful in terms of providing space for interaction between experts and practitioners who deal with the issue of language and learning, particularly in the context of multilingual education.
Very enlightening and in line with what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm feeling like it's really a great synergy to be here.
We hope you enjoyed the video. Now, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the closing ceremony. May I invite Ms. Karin Hulshof, UNICEF Regional Director, East Asia and the Pacific, EAPRO, on behalf of Asia Pacific Multilingual Education Working Group, to please come on stage for the closing remarks.
A very good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues, partners, and friends. I'm truly honored to be asked to share these final words with all of you on this important conference on mobility, inclusion, and multilingual education. So first, let me start by saying a real congratulations for being brave, choosing this topic for our conference. We live in a time where migration and diversity are seen by many as a threat and not as a great opportunity for societies to grow, thrive, and survive, and live better together. So therefore, we need brave individuals like you and institutions to remind us of the beauty, but also the evidence on migration, language, and education. The topics discussed at the conference are indeed very critical, as we are witnessing a surge in global migration. Today, more than 68.5 million people are forced from their homes, including 25 million refugees, half of whom are children and adolescents. In fact, Asia Pacific is home to the largest number of migrants and refugees in the world. 2 out of 5 child migrants in the world live in Asia. But let us not forget that even before this surge in migration, the Asia-Pacific region is the most linguistically diverse part of the world. Our region is home to more than 3,600 languages. Papua New Guinea alone, 800 languages, which is more than half of the world's languages. One of the key messages from the conference is that in practice, all countries in the region are multilingual societies. This linguistic diversity is, of course, beautifully complex. As you discussed, large proportions of children are learning in languages different from their mother tongue, and we just heard the panel also saying that. 2 out of 3 displaced children and adolescents in our region are learning in a language that differs from their own. Linguistic diversity within migrant, displaced, and host communities adds to the beauty and the promise of education. also demands education systems to be more technically sound to achieve equity in learning. As discussed this week, research and data from all over the world has proven again and again that while all children are able to learn, a child cannot learn in a language he or she doesn't understand. In fact, the World Bank has shown that multilingual education increases access and equity in education, improves learning, reduces repetitions and dropout, and has financial benefits resulting from improved education efficiency. More recently, in 2016, an analysis of the Education Commission concluded that multilingual education is the most highly effective intervention to increase access to education and learning. In other words, it is the most cost-effective intervention a ministry can implement. In November, the Convention on the Rights of the Child will celebrate its 30th anniversary. Despite all the very clear evidence and the legal frameworks established in the past 30 years, children from migrant and displaced communities have lower enrollment rates than their peers. In fact, very few refugee children attend school, and less than 1% made it to higher education. So I was very impressed by Dorcas that you made it to higher education. Congratulations. Children from ethno-linguistic minority groups are also less likely to attend school, less likely to learn, and more likely to drop out. Many of them are also victims of violence and discrimination. In 2019, 35 million children remain out of school. As Nobel Peace Prize winner Kailash Satyarthi said, the biggest crisis knocking on the doors of humanity today is intolerance. We have utterly failed in imparting an education for our children, an education that gives the meaning and objective of life and secure future, an education that builds a sense of global citizenship among the young people. So with the feeling of urgency brought by this conference, I believe that multilingual education is the game changer to improve learning and inclusion in education. Thus, I would like to highlight 3 key takeaways. We heard already from our colleague from the Philippines the takeaways of the high-level meeting, and now it is a bit about the whole forum that we had. First, it's time now to make a pivotal change in our policies and mindsets. We must stop thinking of language as a barrier to be tackled, and rather an approach as an opportunity for including more children and young people in learning. The world is changing rapidly, and we are going through the 4th industrial revolution, in which we cannot leave anyone behind. Therefore, we need to make decisive and sustainable investments in our children and young people to equip them with the knowledge, skills, and life competencies that they will need to be tomorrow ready. Language and multilingualism is perhaps the most critical skill of the 21st century, as it is an enabler of other skills such as adaptability, meaningful communication, critical thinking, and collaboration. Thus, we must embrace multilingualism as an asset of our societies. Second, we need to make language a pathway to inclusion and learning in schools. This requires better language and education policies. It requires diversifying the teacher workforce and improving the recruitment and deployment of teachers who speak children's languages. It also implies better alignment of materials, curriculum, and evaluations with multilingual and multicultural values. Implementing such changes in schools require increasing investments and improving support schemes for schools and also for children. Finally, we need to make language in education a pathway to social inclusion. In developing language in education policies, we must strengthen and broaden our partnerships with local language and migrant communities. We should see civil society organizations, academics, networks such as the Asia-Pacific Multilingual Education Working Group as partners to support governments. It's all of us. Expanding partnerships will require raising awareness in our countries and communities. And we must remind ourselves that multilingualism is the reality of today's world. And I see it as an opportunity for promoting global citizenship, tolerance, and respect for diversity. Good policies and programs can build the bridges to end intolerance and discrimination, particularly against refugees and migrants. Taking a positive approach to language from the early years through adolescence will develop solid human capital in each country context. At UNICEF, we believe every single child and adolescent has a right to survive, to thrive, and to fulfill his or her potential. We also believe that all children and adolescents have the right to dream in their mother tongue and in all the languages they love. Let us work together to make multilingual education a reality for every child and a game changer for ensuring inclusive quality education in Asia Pacific and beyond. As Kailash Sadarthi said, if not now, then when? If not you, then who? Kop kun ka, dankjewel, and thank you.
Thank you very much for your message. Now, may I invite Mr. Jonathan Shaw, Executive Director, AIT Extension, on behalf of the Language and Development Trustees.
Thank you very much, and I would first just like to say what a pleasure it is to see such a packed audience at this time in the conference. I think that reflects the enthusiasm and the importance that we all attach to these issues. So I'd like to start by inviting everybody to give yourselves a big hand. So, Excellencies, colleagues, partners, friends, it's really an honor for me to be delivering these closing remarks at the Inclusion and Mobility and Mother Language Education 2019 conference. My name is Jonathan Shaw, and I work at the Asian Institute of Technology, where the Language and Development Conference series started 26 years ago. It was mentioned that it was 25 years, but we're a biannual conference, so it's actually 26 years, and although it should be the 14th conference, we're celebrating the 13th conference. So the reason we're back in Bangkok is that we considered that this was an extremely opportune moment to celebrate the Language and Development Conferences, and we are delighted to have had the opportunity to partner with the MLE conference, and it's really been an extraordinary collaboration. And I think if we look at the themes of the conference and the richness of the papers that have been presented, we can recognize the value of bringing these two conferences and the various partners into this event. It's been an extraordinary journey. So I wanted to address a little bit about this conference's themes, but I also wanted to, in common with issues that Karin's raised, talk a little bit about future conference themes. So we're talking about inclusion, mobility, and mother language education. And in both conferences, I think the theme has changed every time we offer it, but the changes have largely been haven't necessarily built on the journey that we've got to so far. Every time we start, we think about what themes we want to consider. And one thing that's very clear is that the issues that we're addressing in this conference and the many wonderful solutions and wonderful ideas that we've heard, these issues are not going to go away. These are the issues that we are all dealing with professionally, and we can expect to deal with in 2 years' time, or 4 years' time, or 6 years' time. And I'm going to address that with reference to many of the things that we've heard in this conference. When we talk about mobility, There's a big debate about higher education, but this conference has focused much more on other aspects of migration, on refugee crises, on displacements of people. We've heard the numbers. Karin just repeated the number of 60 million, I think, and elsewhere this morning, I think Misty and her team mentioned 70 million. These are the majority of these people, the 57%, come from Afghanistan, Syria, and South Sudan. The IOM in 2008 noted that by 2050, we could anticipate 200 million climate refugees. And that was in 2008, so 11 years ago that estimate was made. More recently, the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security in 2015 suggested that the number of climate migrants in 2050 would be somewhere between 25 million and 1 billion. And more recently, the IOM has upped the billion estimate to 1.5 billion. So I think it's fair to say at the moment that although climate is without doubt a contributory element to a lot of the issues that are driving migration at the moment, these issues are going to become more important as we move forward. So the work that all of us are engaged in will continue to be increasingly important. And the issues and the problems that we are facing and the challenges of reconciling the issues of mobility and inclusion that were so brilliantly framed by François Grain in the opening keynote, those are the issues that we are going to have to continue trying to resolve. Kathleen Hugh also mentioned we're all migrants, and that was also strongly borne out by Howell's plenary yesterday. We, of course, are all migrants, but every one of us in the room can, when we're ready, can trace our ancestry to, most likely, to Africa. But if we're not ready to make those go on that journey yet, then I think most of us will recognize that we have ancestors from other countries. We have antecedents from various places, and those journeys are changing and continuing and accelerating at the moment. So, critical takeaways on the continuing relevance of this conference. The highlighting of context and the need to think systematically. The need to be skeptical about looking for best practices because every context is different. Because even if we have a wealth of materials in one area, they're not necessarily immediately transferable to another context, in another country, or even in another town. We need to focus a lot more on the education receiving communities. There's been talk of asset and deficit approaches, so focusing on the assets that refugees and children and adults who are learning bring, rather than looking at their deficits. And I think that this is a very important mind shift, and Karin's highlighted again the importance of pivoting our mindsets. And then understanding mental health issues. We've seen a number of brilliant presentations on addressing trauma, but it's not just trauma. As a species, we're becoming increasingly aware of the diversity of mental health issues that almost everybody in this room has personal experience of. And then understanding also how diversity enriches. Because unless we understand how diversity enriches, we're not going to be able to address this issue of belonging and what was memorably framed in the UK by the former Prime Minister Theresa May as the conflict between citizens of nowhere and citizens of somewhere. We are all, in that framing, citizens of nowhere. We are citizens of everywhere, right? But we all are looking to be somewhere. So moving beyond that false dichotomy. Then we look at the drivers and the trends of these issues. You have climate change, which I've mentioned already. You have urbanization as a driver. Yesterday, I went to a fantastic presentation on Words on the Wall by Luis Aquino. And one thing that you realize is that urbanization is fine, but it's changing the demographics of every single community in the world. And that changes how local languages are learned and the importance of local languages. So in the particular case that we looked at yesterday, there is the effect on Pangasinan as the local language, because increasingly people are not perceiving a need for that. And then the relative importance of the national language, Tagalog, and of course English. We're looking then something that probably introduces a major element of uncertainty into those projections of climate refugees in the future is the Sustainable Development Goals and how successful we are going to be in actually addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. Because if we are successful, then the chances are that the numbers of refugees are going to be considerably smaller. And that applies across all 17 of the SDGs. They're all interrelated. So it's not just the climate change one, it's not just the education one, or the hunger, or the poverty, it's all of them. Then you've got technology and how technology actually enables us and should enable us to address the SDGs, but also being wary of technology because of the unintended consequences of many of the technologies that have led us to where we are today. We're looking at the impacts on democracy of technology as well. And we're also looking at how many of these factors have contributed to increasing inequality, and how inequality is largely is a factor in pretty much every context that we've looked at. And then, of course, the issues of elite capture and wealth accumulation. So as resources become scarcer, and we know that the wars in the future are largely going to be driven by scarcities of environmental resources, particularly water, then issues of elite capture and wealth accumulation become more important. So critics like George Monbiot have recently argued that we have to look at how we can cap wealth accumulation. It's no longer acceptable to just recognize that wealth can be endlessly accumulated. Then there's been a large focus here on youth. But what there's been less of a focus on, and like many people in this audience, perhaps I'm increasingly aware of that, is education for older citizens, older people. And partly that's addressed in issues of adult education for refugees, but it's really an issue for every one of us as well, because we're no longer looking at retiring at 60 and maybe living for 15 years after that. We're going to live until we're 100. 50% of us are going to live till we're 100. And that's true of everybody in this room already. And so how do we prepare people for that life? And that is largely a question of education. And then I'd just like to come to two final issues that Hal touched on. The issue of global governance, which of course we have the SDGs, we've got the fantastic work being done here. But is it enough? And again, Karin's call for a pivotal response echoes that of Greta Thunberg's earlier this week at the UN Climate Summit in New York. And it's clear that we need to continue improving our systems of global governance. So that unless we do, we're simply not going to be able to respond quickly enough. And at the heart of that is the problem with the nation state. And Howell also mentioned that, and I've had discussions with other colleagues like Chris on the limits of the nation state. And there aren't, at present, you can say, what are the alternatives to the nation state as a mechanism for governing? We don't have any. And nation states are not going to disappear tomorrow or anytime soon. We've invented a monster, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, if you like, that is simply there, and it's a reality that we're going to have to live with, and we're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to adapt our global systems of governance to to accommodate the shortcomings of the nation state. And one of the great shortcomings of nation states, of course, is identity, and how do we ensure that identity remains fluid and dynamic rather than fixed and static and backward-looking and insular? Because all of us want an identity that is going to be forward-looking and fluid and accommodating of people, the up to 1.5 billion people whose identities and sense of place and belonging have changed and will change. I don't think I would say much about solutions to this. There are economists in the room who know much more about this issue, but if we look at theories such as donut economics that has been proposed relatively recently by Kate Raworth of Cambridge, there's also this fascinating concept of private sufficiency and public luxury that has echoes of His Majesty King Bhumibol Adulyadej's sufficiency economy, but takes it a step further. It's not just about sufficiency, but also ensuring that the public goods, the commons, are available to everybody. And some places are doing this better than others, so the goal ultimately is to ensure that the commons are there for everybody. And then one other issue that struck me, and this is tangential, is the issue of empathetic leadership. We hear about different kinds of leadership, but empathy and being able to relate to our people is something that we all, the students that we're teaching, the people we employ, our families, empathetic leadership is clearly something we need to know much more about. So again, I think I would echo finally for the third time this need for a pivotal change in mindset. It was there it was the motivation behind the organization of the UN Climate Action Conference this week. Greta Thunberg made it very clear. I think we need to endorse that, and we need to recognize that what we're doing is good, but we need to go a lot further, and we need to be prepared to do a lot more than we've been doing. And it's my job also at this point just to say a few thank yous. So I'd like to start by thanking UNESCO and their partners, the Summer Institute of Linguistics, SIL, UNICEF, the Pestalozzi Children's Foundation, CMEO, Save the Children, CARE International, and the Research Institute for Languages and Culture for Rural Development at Mahidol University. I'd like to thank the British Council and for their brilliant support for this conference. And I'd like to thank this hotel, the Amari Watergate, that it's been wonderful being here, and it's done a fantastic job. I'm not sure whether I'm speaking on behalf of the trustees. I'm certainly not representing them. The views I'm expressing are my own, although I doubt whether my colleagues will disagree. But I'd just like to mention that the Language and Development Conference, the LDC trustees, Manati Debanjan, John Nag, Suzinho, Psyche, Denise, Tony, Jeff, Bill, Mike, and Philip. And this is the first time that we've actually all got together in person, or at least 9 of us have got together in person. And it's been a real pleasure. As Psyche mentioned last night, it's really a delight working with this group of people. And I'd like to thank all of you for being friends, many of you for close to 3 decades now. And finally, I would like to thank the team of volunteers, the note takers, everybody involved in the reviewing of abstracts, the program team, the events organizers, and then the participants in the conference, and of course, all of the speakers for making this happen and for contributing to this great event. Thank you to all of you. With that, it is my great honor to declare this conference closed, and we look forward to meeting all of you, we hope, at the 7th MLE conference or the 14th Language and Development Conference, wherever those may be held. And in the meantime, we will stay in touch with you, and we look forward to working on the conference outputs and communicating with all of you through the various channels that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the final remarks of this conference. So this is the end of the Inclusion, Mobility, and Multilingual Education Conference. We will be sending out post-conference questionnaires to your email, so we would very much appreciate it if you can take some time to fill them out. And I need to call out names one last time, so please bear with me. So Fiko Jalava, Telma Huka, Arif Ula, Na Bue Pa, Zin Min Kya, Niget Nasim Riaz. Please go to Ms. Ayin at registration to sign your attendance. Lastly, we hope you have found the conference very useful and had the opportunity to network with various people. Please don't forget to take your belongings and have a safe journey back. Thank you for attending the conference.